Welcome back to Left Anchor. I'm Alexei the Greek.
And I'm Ryan Cooper. Today we're welcoming back to the podcast Senator Nikil Saval from the... Wait, which district is it?
I knew you weren't going to look that up.
I was going to...
First district.
The first. I was going to say first, I promise.
It's easy to remember because it's the first. Yeah.
The first and therefore best. You know, they rank the districts in order of coolness.
True.
And so Nikil has the number one coolest district. But so you were just reelected. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
You know, as a Democrat in, Philly, so long as you can win any primary, usually pretty solid chance. Nevertheless, though, you're one of these lefty folks who have sort of come up into the Democratic ranks and, making some progress there. So well done. Well done.
Thank you. And I owe it in, at least in part, to this podcast. There's no...
The correlation is remarkable, actually.
Yeah, it's hard to see another path without having gone on this podcast. So, and now I'm on the left here and apparently just tanking the Democratic Party and its chances, as we know. So,
the left's fault again somehow.
Yeah,
yep.
Yeah, I want to get into that, definitely. But the first thing we should talk about a little bit is sort of what happened in Pennsylvania and in Philly in particular. And basically, whereas Harris lost the national margin compared to Biden by something like 6 points, whereas, Biden won quite a convincing popular vote majority, Harris lost slightly. Trump's going to get under 50%. It's going to be one of the narrowest pluralities in American history, but nevertheless, it's the first popular vote victory since 2004 when George W. Bush won re-election. In Pennsylvania, however, it was a lot closer. There wasn't that big of a swing where Biden won by like 1.5 points in 2020. This time, Trump won by about 1.5 points. And one of the places where Trump gained the most, kind of weirdly, inexplicably, is in Philly. So in 2020, he got 132,740 votes. In 2024, he got 144,311 votes. Biden in 2020 got 603,790 votes. Harris in 2024 got 568,521 votes. So Trump improved on his vote total by about 12,000, and Harris lost, by my count, about 35,000 votes. And Trump did better basically everywhere, but one of the places he improved the most was dense Democratic, traditionally just like hyper partisan centers where Democrats have more or less taken for granted over the years. And, perhaps worth noting that Biden did worse, if I'm not mistaken, in Philly than Hillary Clinton did in 2016. And I think Hillary Clinton did worse in Philly than Barack Obama did in 2012. So this isn't a one-off pattern where somehow Donald Trump, this is a long-term thing. And so I guess, my first question for you, Nikil, is, sort of what was your your sense on the ground, going around talking to constituents and so on? Why was Trump plainly more appealing and why was Harris not so much?
Well, thanks for having me on to discuss this. I mean, there is, it's sort of an unfortunate caveat, but there is a bit of parsing that's still left to be done, at this late date, in some ways, a few weeks after the election. So I think, in fact, some of the kind of granular sense of why, what messages and what sort of activities sort of resonated, and what didn't, because there's both a decline in Democratic turnout and also improvement, in vote share and probably in some areas, there's just various ways that Trump improved in across categories. And, why is not, it's not exactly a mystery, but it's just like, there's more probably complexity there than than we might be able to get to now. But, I would say that on the ground, I mean, it's hard to say in one sense because, anecdotally, of course, the areas that I was doing the most work in were areas that largely voted overwhelmingly, like for Kamala Harris. And so we were essentially juicing turnout, right? Like we've been building, I ran 2 get out the vote operations in South Philadelphia, with my colleague Representative Elizabeth Fiedler, and then in the river wards in Fishtown, Kensington, and Port Richmond with my colleague, Representative Joe Hohenstein. And, in various ways, like actually in the river wards, we ended up delivering more votes for Harris than Biden received. It's so obviously not enough. It was a small part of the overall picture, but so there was clear activity that did work. But when I would say that when I talked to people personally, when I was knocking doors who were on the fence, right? And sometimes this was like a couple days before the election, but I thought this just can't be possible. But it was possible. And it was, on the one hand, some of them weren't surprising. Some of the conversations were around prices, right? And I think I remember one particular conversation in a low income housing area where someone just said, "Oh, my vote's secret. I'm not going to tell you, but really we're concerned. We made a decision, my partner and I." This was someone who was a recent immigrant to this country, and they I believe from North Africa, and they said that but the prices are out of control, and that's sort of motivating a lot of what we're thinking about. And I guess I don't know how that person voted, but I just feel like it was not promising, right? It was not a promising conversation. And there was someone else who just felt like, a little bit unsure of Harris's position, just positions generally, new to Harris, new to the campaign, and was, leaning libertarian, right? And that was like, that's essentially a vote that we probably lost, or unless they changed their mind on election day. But overall, that prices, immigration, safety, those were some of the messages that we got from people who were not sure of their votes or were voting the other way. And, broadly speaking, none of that is unfamiliar, from the national picture, from the overall abstraction of people's voting preferences. I think that and then I should also say in many of the areas that we canvassed, there was concern about the current administration's and Vice President Harris's positions on the war in Gaza. That was, I don't know that was determining. Yeah, it seems safe to say that it was not in the overall picture, but it was something we heard. Anyway, to get to the kind of like overall sense of like what happened, I mean, I'd say that we're at a confluence of 2 different things. One is, and it's unfortunate, it feels like it's very unsatisfying to say this, is just a candidate who was inheriting a very unpopular incumbent, the mantle of taking the candidacy from a very unpopular incumbent who presided over his historically rising prices. And, due to supply side shocks and, COVID issues, et cetera, as well as the expiration, it should be said, of a number of popular, COVID era policies. Like they both, helped support some of those policies, helped pass them, and then saw them expire. Whether that was, enhanced, Medicaid, that was, eviction supports, there's just the child tax credit, of course, so many different things that benefited people and then expired right as prices started to rise. So there was very little cushion. Prices, so an eviction supports start to expire as housing prices rise, right? I mean, these things are not insignificant. But so Harris inherited that, could not distance herself, meaningfully in various ways. I'm not going to kind of comment on the quality of the campaign one or the other. I just don't think that was ultimately determining. I mean, there are significant things to take away from it as a campaign, but that, that's not, we're talking about why one lost and when. And then the overall trends that we're talking about that, I sort of was concerned, even just going into it, that we would have trouble arresting those trends in a way that would, or, meaningfully denting. That was really what I thought. I really, and it seems like much of the work that I was involved in doing was trying to figure out ways that we could, in the areas I represented, which were relatively high turnout, in part due to the work that we've done, how much more could we get? How solid could we make it? Because it might be worse in other areas where the activity had been less strong. And overall that added up to a picture in which turnout was a tick or two below 2020, right? Which was, but the vote share that Harris got was the Democrats got, was bad, was worse. And then it was worse, in a number of different areas across Pennsylvania. But clearly the work did something, right? I mean, I think there's a reason that these so-called battleground states were, the losses were not as bad as they were in states where we just weren't putting in that kind of work, and for good reason, right? In New York State or what have you. But those swings are still relevant, right? The fact that New York City went so hard, was a much more dramatic swing for Trump in various areas. I mean, that's still relevant. That's still data that I think points to, what was going on in this election.
What do you think, Nikil, about the extent to which, and this could just be in PA, or if you have a view of the broader country, the ticket splitting that went on to say help certain Democrats in the PA House so that they could, have the House, or even the kind of anecdotal, AOC kind of made waves with a little, was it an Instagram thing about the AOC Trump voters and wanting to understand where they were coming from. But she wasn't the only person that experienced that. We see all across the country, there were kind of leftist policies on abortion or other things, minimum wage, that did well in red states where Trump was voted in heavily. What's your sense of ticket splitting, whether, favoring Trump or maybe, not favoring Harris, and how local or state politics are just different, or what's your view on how the trends affect those differences or explain those differences?
I should also say there's plenty of Saval Trump voters that our canvassers encountered. I mean, so they voted on the one hand for a Democratic socialist state senator, and,
right.
But then, and some of that is actually is maybe simpler than it seems, right? Or simpler than, or as simple as it seems, I guess I should say, that people have local representatives that they care about, and they they work with closely, they understand, have met, and we're not in as deeply polarized elections, many of us, and as these, right? And so
constituent services as well, right? That kind of thing.
All of it, right? And then you make they, in a way, then you're like, oh, the voter is making that choice makes a certain kind of sense. They're like, well, I like this person who I work with all the time, but I actually, on a national level, I prefer this. It's just, I of course don't agree with them preferring Trump to understate the case, but it makes sense in that way. And I think that's honestly what's happening with some of these other, issues. I mean, like it just may be the case that, voters do want to protect abortion rights or, vote to enshrine them in their state, but they feel like, that's either not at issue with Donald Trump, and which is not, not accurate, right? But it's not fully at issue. And there are other things that they care about more, that they feel like they're going to get more from Trump, and so they're weighing the issue, they're weighing the calculations. There's just something about a deeply polarized election at a national level where many people will never, ever see the candidate. They'll just experience, through this kind of screen of many, many opinions. versus the state representative candidate who knocks on your door, and maybe has meaningfully distinct positions or positions that are more tangible to people's lives on a local level than some of the national, the national candidates. And so that's just, we were able to keep, as you mentioned, we were able to keep the Pennsylvania House in Democratic hands. And abortion did matter, right? And you could say that voters probably think, yeah, we actually, given what's happened, what the Supreme Court has done, we need to protect abortion rights at the state level, at the Commonwealth, in our Commonwealth. Yeah. I'm going to vote for the candidates here that are going to do that, and also vote for the other issues that I care about, Yeah.
But then at the AG race level, they don't do that. Is it because they don't realize which AG would actually enforce an abortion ban and which wouldn't, or like?
I'm not sure what the data will show us or what we're going to be able to parse from that AG race. And I mean, which in Pennsylvania, there was just a tremendous amount of, profoundly outspent, I think, right. But that said,
wasn't there a big billionaire that funded a lot of these things? I forget his name, right?
Jeffrey Yass. Yes. Yeah. Jeffrey Yass, one of the wealthiest people in the country, and certainly the wealthiest person in the Commonwealth, who is, has been funded a huge number of these races. Of course, he lost the amount, he didn't win in the Pennsylvania House, and we sort of held even in the Pennsylvania Senate. So, yeah. Held serve, I guess you could say. But it's what happened in the AG race, I'm not sure, but I would say that people could again have been voting on, prosecutorial experience, like it could have been, and also, I mean, the attorney general races can often go that way. I think people will vote in a Republican attorney general and a Democratic governor or what have you. I mean, that's, I think, because there's like a certain attraction to, again, like a right-wing prosecutorial ethos with that office. But yeah, I think but all of that points to a world in which people are weighing different risks and issues of importance. And that may be overstating the kind of rationality of it, but it seems like hard to kind of parse any other way.
I have a question about the ground game. The canvassers, and so on, who are out there knocking doors, talking to people, because I'm up here in NEPA, the Scranton Wilkes-Barre area, and I saw a ton of Harris Walls canvassers. I was door knocked like 5 times. And more to the point, I think, cause it's not surprising that I would be door knocked by the Democrats, even though I was sent a bale of Republican mailers, though at the same time, I think they were just sending them to every address in the state. I did not get door knocked by any Republicans. I did not see a single canvasser out driving around the city. And I saw probably, 25, 30 of the Harris Walls canvassers out there with their camo hats. And it just seemed, that this, with a lot of other reporting, it just seemed that there just wasn't that much of a Republican ground game. I mean, there are some out there, funded by Elon Musk, and they're supposedly going in the most inefficient possible manner to like really marginal, voters in rural areas. But I don't know, what did you see in Philly? Was it door knockers from Trump that were turning these people out?
No, similarly, the Harris Walls and just generally Democratic ticket ground game was much, much stronger in terms of sheer volume and effort and just interest. And, from my perspective, we started canvassing, we thought it was important to start canvassing somewhat early, and we were preparing our ground game efforts, which were basically coordinated, to be clear, with the Democratic, with the overall campaign. But we, I think that there's 2 things going on. One is, in a swing of this kind, the margin it is not, as they say, a field margin. It's just like it can sometimes go beyond that. And so, like if you have like thousands of doors knocked in the last days of a campaign, but something else is going on, there's a shift in a different direction, you may not be able to like to change the mobilization or interest or turnout to the degree that you need to with those means. It's just like, it may not work.
Yeah.
It's part of a strategy. It's a major part of a strategy. But it's not, Hillary Clinton's ground game was better in 2016. Biden's ground game was better in 2020, even though ground game was a complex term in during the COVID years, but a COVID moment. But Unite Here was knocking thousands and thousands of doors, at that time as well. So, but I would say, and I think those things were important. All of those things were important in various ways. The other thing is that we have, those structures don't really exist in off years, right? Or off moments. What we have tried to do in South Philly and other areas was try to create the infrastructure where it, it had fallen apart or it just didn't exist. And it does exist, and we do a good job, right? And we have like neighbors and local committee people who are trusted. They knock doors. They get more answers. They can also go back. We can go back to people who we're not totally reaching. If you were the neighbor who's going back to your neighbor who is upset about, is not sure about which way they're going to go. It's important that you've already built a relationship of trust, and you can kind of build on that. Or or that relationship of trust is built on helping them get access to services with their local, elected official, and so, all of that matters. And absent that, and absent then more broadly, really strong city and state parties, which have atrophied not just in Pennsylvania, but, in Philadelphia, but in many places for a long time. It's hard to make up for it in this blitz of campaigning, which doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, right? I mean, I think that was the right decision to try to put effort into that. But that was not what was happening, this election. And again, the effort clearly paid off to the degree that it was better in these other states. And, there's people we'll look to, and we'll find out more about Wisconsin in particular, which seems to have a pretty strong state party. And they've done, they have done really serious work, and there's have major electoral success in their Supreme Court election. And, so, we're going to kind of figure out, I think, what that meant. But if you feel like the Democratic Party and the candidacy aren't going to be the things that fight that's not the party, and this isn't the candidate that's going to fight for you in the meaningful way that, you feel, then it's not, we can't.
Right.
It's
not a tactical problem at that point. It's something else.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. I have a former student who did a great job as a field organizer for Brian Monroe, who, won in the PA House in a district, if I have the numbers right, something like 20,000 registered Republicans, 17,000 Democrats, 5,000 independents. I might get that slightly wrong, but it was not a gimme for sure, even though he was
absolutely not. Yeah.
And what I heard from this former student is part of their success was, and again, if I get the lingo wrong, going after hard persuasion voters, which he said, with their data, it's like people that the data shows are between 20 and 40% likely to vote for your guy or something. Right. And that he got a 19% conversion rate with hard persuasion people. And what he told me was his experience working with or talking to the Harris Walls people is they just avoided hard persuasion to a large extent. I don't know if that's true, but they focused more on people that they were trying to mobilize. And I'm less concerned about commenting on the success of the tactics or strategy of the Harris campaign, but to the extent that this speaks to your point about off years and about general movement building and the need to kind of coalition build and think about helping people understand that if it's a Democratic Party, they're there for you. And there's a kind of vision that, say, like Bernie's statement recently speaks to, that there's a kind of understanding of this is what people are for. They're not just the alternative to the bad guy Trump and MAGA, right? Like, what do you think about this diagnosis for the long term, about needing to build up kind of a positive vision rather than just be like, we're the status quo party who's not fascist or whatever? Like, what do you think about those kind of considerations?
Yeah, that really brings us to the central problematic. I mean, like, we're now couple weeks out, already inundated with sort of like a sense of what is it as the where should we be going, and actually there's like there's obviously people are sort of purveying the kind of like, they're using the opportunity to kind of purvey the vision of the party, or near medium term or what have you, like that they've nursed for, and the grudges they nursed against various organizations and what have you for a long time. But have at it, right? You're gonna. I don't know that
now's the time. I guess
now's the time to some degree in that spirit. Here's mine. Of course. I mean, I think it has its own validity, whether it is the explanation for this particular electoral loss or not, because it's just hard to imagine. We can build a party and an infrastructure that will still lose elections, right? Like that has to be conceivable. And even if it's a project that we support and believe in wholeheartedly, right? It's not always, we have to imagine that that's not foolproof. For sure, we need to be thinking in terms of building massive majorities. And actually, lots of people agree with this in various ideological ways. But, we need that to do that. We need to be fighting for significant economic transformation and political change in this country. And, the strangeness of the current Democratic Party is that, it's obviously by comparison with so many other parties, center-left parties in the world, it's extremely conservative, right? An extremely conservative party of, that is increasingly composed of wealthier people in its base, is shedding working class voters at the same time that it is, compared with the Democratic Party of 30 or 40 years ago, more sort of uniformly liberal as a party. There is actually more consensus within it about, basic kind, a lot of different issues. Does that mean that it's not a party also of imperialism, of of exploitative capitalism, of plutocracy? It has of course, a lot of that as well, right? But but it is, in some ways, it's not there. We have shed, there's many Southern segregationist conservatives, which, and et cetera, right? There's just like to name one faction that is no longer part of the party infrastructure. And tons. And so it's also, so it's not also on the verge of being like wiped out in a way that's like, or like going through Pesacification and like, just like total dwindling. The French Socialist Party, that's not really where things are headed. It commands a huge number of votes and a lot of people. But it has no ostensible project that it has no real, that's certainly the risk. I could certainly name aspects of the project that I believe in, right? As both as a person on the left and as someone who's an elected Democrat, right? And I'm going to fight for those things, right? But it's like, but as an overall project, like it's not clear that there is, it doesn't
cohere. It doesn't have an integrative vision, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because of the tensions within liberalism, let's be honest, right? Like that's,
Well, the Sanders project, the Sanders campaign was in some ways designed to give the Democratic Party that project, right? Like here's this set of principles here, and then it continued for, between 2016 and 2020 and hit a high point of sorts in 2020 with the national campaign. And yet, that project was in a sense directly counterposed to the trends that we're talking about. It was, in fact, to kind of explode rural and urban boundaries through a Green New Deal, transformation. It was meant to win working class voters and promise like real changes in the ability for people to organize their lives and to organize their workplaces. And we saw glimpses of that in the Biden program. I mean, they ended up making their way into Build Back Better, and which failed, and the PRO Act, which failed. And, like these things that we, were at least part of the project. But those things also go against the overall future path for electoral success for the Democratic Party, or at least part of it, which is, growing in suburbs among wealthier voters, and, the party of redistribution and economic power for working class people is also the party of wealthier, affluent suburbanites. I don't know. These are the contradictions, and they do have some roots in what liberalism is at this point.
I mean, it's kind of peculiar because it doesn't seem that difficult to me, at least domestically, to like sort of frame up a Biden take on what the Democratic Party should be about: unions, industrial policy, and welfare. We're going to bring back the child tax credit. That was a big Harris plank. We have this Inflation Reduction Act, very strangely named law, but it's like catalyzed a major economic restructuring. Inflation adjusted manufacturing investment has like more than doubled, I believe. A bunch of that is flowing into the, so-called left behind conservative rural areas that have been the focus of so much like sociological research. And yet, not only did Harris as far as the data I've seen, all that investment did not pay off at all. Nothing, not a vote. And also didn't get any credit for extremely low unemployment and, wages growing and inequality falling by quite a bit, because, median wages were sort of keeping pace with inflation a little bit above in 2023 and 2024, but they were growing the fastest at the bottom. This is a type of thing that if you're Bernie Sanders, you would think, you should be able to run on that. And yet, not only did it sort of like mechanical economic determinist sort of logic not seem to hold, there was just like they didn't really run on it. Harris didn't really talk about that sort of thing very much. It was in the campaign messaging here and there. But, my question is like, to what extent do you think the information environment is important here? Because, I think back to 2004, when George W. Bush, like one of his big planks was like he kept us safe after, not stopping the worst terrorist attack in American history. And in fact, it actually improved his popularity by a lot. It was like 90% approval rating right afterwards. And this cycle, it seems that Donald Trump paid no price for having catastrophically messed up the response to the COVID pandemic. And by the same token, Biden is blamed for inflation, which is probably to a, 2/3 degree or so entirely outside of his control. It was all about supply chain disruptions and the war in Ukraine that increased the price of natural gas, messed up all this stuff. And so he doesn't get a gimme on that, but Trump gets a gimme on the thing that he like straight up killed like 200,000 people by just pretending that it wasn't happening for several months right at the beginning when it really would have mattered to clamp down on the spread. And, when I'm walking around my neighborhood in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, I take my son for a walk around the block every day. And I've sort of grown acquainted with some of my neighbors there's like a street there that's mostly sort of Dominican immigrants. And when I would sort of chat them up, lovely people, they all adore my son. He's very cute. I would hear not only Republican talking points coming out of their mouths, often in Spanish, because a lot of them barely speak English at all, but anti-immigrant talking points. Talking about how, all of these asylum seekers coming in, they don't want to work. And, they're not like me, the good person who's been here for, 30 30 years or 10 years, or probably a whole bunch of them are undocumented. And the fact that Donald Trump's campaign proposal is to deport this entire block of people, to just send them wherever, don't care. And like the fact that that didn't have any effect whatsoever speaks to a just utterly poisoned information transmission system. I mean, you could say these people have a duty to sort of get educated, but like, who's doing it? Certainly, me trying to explain in my busted ass Spanish that like, no, this guy's really bad. Like I was just swimming against the tide of something. Social media, Spanish language radio stations that conservatives have been buying up all over the country, Spanish language newspapers, tabloids. So I don't know if you have thoughts on like just, I don't know, what do you want to call it? Propaganda, media, the fact that Democrats spend $5 billion on ads in the election year and then completely forget about it for 2 years. What do you think?
It's, on the one hand, it's just on the overall, there's sad kind of sadness, missed opportunities to trumpet the successes of the, what many on the left, for some period of time supported, right? Or certainly were excited or interested or curious about it. I mean, it seems like another political era when people were debating the finer points of green industrial policy. Was it, going to stimulate, real change? Was it just de-risking? I mean, like this is this. Yeah. I mean, and I was fascinated by it as well. And now, it seems at least very likely or certainly possible that a lot of that could be repealed to the extent that it is, possible to repeal it. But it's not. I mean, there's a level to which this is simply not fair, right? And this is politics, right? It is like there is a degree to which you preside over price increases that are, yes, due to COVID supply shocks. And, while at the same time that you've managed to deliver major, economic benefits to lots of people and to some degree change the aspects of political power by giving more power to working people and done some significant, work for organized labor, and yet, the benefits are nil to negative, right? And for that, there's a level to which that can be explained, and there's a level to which there's a just deep unfairness about it in terms of political timing and whatever. But that is what we live with, right? And so if those are the things that you're going to have to fight against, if that you have to fight against people, no matter what, deeply upset about prices, what are you going to do about it, right? Are you going to do something politically? Are you going to do something policy wise? I think we have to just face up to those things. But in terms of how you communicate them, I mean, on the one hand, we did have our current president was not good at it. Was not good at communicating these things. And I mean, once it was clear for some time that he was not good at communicating it. And and among other things, and, that we needed to shift course drastically. Right. And we clearly did that. I mean, I think it's safe to say, that we shifted course late. Right. And we as a broad, I think, various people saying earlier and later that we should have shifted, so there's just that aspect to it. But then on the way that the media travels, I mean, and the way the information gets purveyed, I mean, absolutely. And, I'm not, I can't speak exactly to the way that people receive it, their information, in different demographics, language groups, what have you. But it's something that I think that that I think people tried to overcome in various ways in this campaign. There's some question about, but you will fundamentally, I think there wasn't enough to say to people, right? And potentially there was a message that encompassed all of those things that you're talking about. Look at, but also elections are also about the future, and they're not just about your accomplishments. And to the extent that you can trumpet your accomplishments and people are like, well, yes, but, look at my life. Right. And or look at what I, and then you have to be able to say, this is what we're going to do. And there was, in this campaign, but just generally among Democrats, a shying away of a lot of not just the achievements, but the kinds of achievements, specifically climate change, right? Was just it was shocking how little it was discussed, even though it had real effects even within the campaign timeline, right? With Hurricane Helene, and that took place, right? And so it's we're close to drought conditions here in Pennsylvania. I mean, there are things that are just were unthinkable in many years ago. So
yeah, they passed $1 trillion climate bill and approximately nobody knows it. Like, I've talked to highly educated people who did not even know that the Inflation Reduction Act was a climate bill, that like more solar panels have been installed under Biden than all previous presidents put together. Battery storage doubled in 2022 and it doubled again in 2023. And it's going to double again probably in 2024. And it was just, nobody's talking about it. And it partly the title of the legislation, but it's like, where's your freaking New Deal poster being like, decarbonize America?
Because they're embarrassed by it so often. See, I can't remember exactly what the specifics were, but over the Biden administration, I remember many times where they would do something good and then like downplay it or be like afraid of like celebrating it because that would be, I don't know, embracing leftist values or something. And then you have, of course, the reality of taking away what was given with the COVID child tax credit and other welfare measures and so forth. So there's some of it is they actually don't really fully believe in things that aren't just emergency measures, but other times it's just they don't embrace what's good about the good things they do. And that this is maybe not unrelated to the whole, let's bring in Liz Cheney and kind of emphasize what a tough prosecutor I was in going after those bad immigrants. I mean, this is not unrelated, I think. Like, you have to have an alternate vision that says, actually, immigrants are humans too. And what Trump says is disgusting. And the real crisis is that we're not taking care of people. Like, I don't know. I think there's not the messaging and the lack of narrative, to me at least. What do you think, Nikil, is somewhat related to the confused policy and political imperatives for Democratic administrations, right?
Yeah, that I totally agree with. I mean, that makes it hard in the sense that if you think about, the last, the period, frankly, since the George Floyd uprising, right? And to the extent to which there has been such a level of retrenchment, in the response or attitudes towards urban policing, kind of most spectacularly with the rise of the kind of cop city proposal in Atlanta, there was, and things like that. But that's just that is the most visible, instance of something like that. But also the return to a kind of, I would call it a return to a kind of punitive mean in the Democratic Party with regards to immigration. I mean, and then, it should be said that just like massive level of repression on university campuses. I mean, of protest and speech, with regards to the war in Gaza. I mean, then protests were related to it. I mean, that was, if you have all of these things happening, at a city level, I mean, I think that, and they're proactive, right? I mean, they like,
right.
They may have be based on judgments of like where the public is at and where, but that's where much of the kind of like party infrastructure devoted its energies. And then there's, to say nothing of housing, right? In the midst of this campaign, or in the midst of this year, let's say, the Supreme Court said that it was okay for cities to criminalize sleeping outside. And a plausible candidate for president, in the near term, Gavin Newsom, who was my mayor, I lived in San Francisco for that time, was trumpeted this, right? And the possibilities that were allowed to cities in California. And so I just personally just reject in the strongest possible terms. Like, we can't that's not what we should be doing. That's not how we solve a housing crisis or a substance use disorder.
Wasn't there like a photo op of him actually like pushing out a homeless person, like actually forcing them out of some area? I vaguely remember Gavin Newsom, like an article that showed him like forcibly removing somebody and having a photo op about it.
Participating in a sweep where they take all of somebody's possessions, their tent and stuff, and throw it in the garbage. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so, I mean, and so as we, and there's like a level, obviously, of debate around this, and where the party, where it just as a matter of, I mean, as a matter of just principle, I mean, you have to reject, the policies of encampment sweeps you have to protect speech on campuses. You have to, I mean, like we have to fight to fight mass incarceration. I mean, these are things that like, I don't think, I think those things are popular generally among gun. And so I also, I mean, to say nothing of just whether they're a matter of like principle.
It's not even like some sort of lefty utopian thing to say that, Joe Biden should uncritically take the side of, the frankly genocidal, Netanyahu project to colonize, to annex most of Gaza, to just totally enable them and to set up multiple red lines, quote unquote, that isn't crossed by the IDF, and he doesn't do anything. That like the details of that never got anything like majority support in the American population. And to your point about housing, it is just straight up nonsensical to say we're going to solve homelessness by just like trying to shove the homeless population from one place to another. The problem in California, and I think maybe this speaks to a sort of broader failure of democratic governance, is that housing is too expensive. It's like a stat I believe I saw recently that New York City built more housing in the 1920s than they did from 1980 up to the present day put together. And so is it any wonder that housing is more expensive now? And, the same thing is true in most of California. There's not enough to go around. The affordability programs are totally overwhelmed. I mean, California spends hundreds of billions of dollars every year on affordable housing sort of subsidies, but there's so much demand for it that it's just completely, it's not enough. You need abundant housing. And whether it's social housing, the YIMBY movement, like there are lots of people in California sort of working on this. It's just a massive failure in terms of just regular block and tackling of government, providing for the mass of the population. Everybody needs a house to live in. This isn't some socialist utopian project, and they just haven't done it in all of these blue cities. And, I mean, God, you look at Kathy Hochul and her congestion pricing about face and then about face again, after spending $500 million on cameras and stuff because some suburban people complained. It's like this, just a lack of vision to do even really basic stuff. And I don't know, I guess I don't have a question per se, but are there places where you see like some people coming up, some people to replace Bernie? Are you going to run for president, for instance?
I mean, we know that if you come on the podcast, it's highly likely you'll win. So
That's true. So at least if that's part of the strategy, there's like a strong chance. Did Bernie come on the podcast? You didn't.
Oh, no, good point. That explains the problem.
I think
he ghosted us. Yeah, that he would have won in 2020 had he gotten the patented left anchor bump, but no.
That's right. That's right. Bernie would have won had he shown up on the left anchor.
Hindsight's 2020.
Yeah. I mean, so it's interesting, and I think this question, it hasn't really, in a way, this fact just hasn't been fully analyzed to the degree that. It's a bit narcissistic, but like 8 years ago when Bernie ran, none of us were in office, right? None of us were even, many of us were, including myself, weren't even considering the idea of running for office. It was inconceivable, to us that was, to many of us, that was the strategy to win power, right? And, to the extent that we were even thinking about winning power. And then two, that we could win, like it should be. And so 8 years later, dozens and dozens of us are actually in levels of elected office or also in government in various ways. I mean, I think there's also a kind of harder to kind of quantify or see effect of people with, on the left, broadly speaking, who are in bureaucracies, who are civil servants, who are, doing innovative things that way. I mean, I think speaking of social housing, much of the innovations in like Montgomery County, Maryland, where they've been able to do so much, is largely due to one person or like a smart lefty person in government, and so, I mean, I'm exaggerating that slightly, but like,
it's like three people. Yeah.
What that?
It's like three people. Yeah.
3 people. Right. Yeah, exactly. But there's like there are people and then there are people in campaigns and like, and they kind of move fluidly between all these worlds, at the same time that academia, as it suffers the things that it's suffering, I mean, in terms of, casualization and all of those trends, I think there's also more, sort of permeability between a lot of what's happening in academia and political life, and the world of lefty magazines, which I was once a very, strong proponent. I mean, I am a strong proponent, but once was a more significant contributor to. So all of that is true, right? All of that, like that infrastructure didn't exist. And I think the kind of infrastructure of organizations, the strength of things like, the Sunrise Movement, like Working Families, like, in Pennsylvania, to name, some statewide organizations, Pennsylvania Stands Up, Make the Road has done a lot. There's just like, this is great, right? In some ways. And so in a way, I think we're in a stronger position to cultivate, build, kind of grow this movement. I think there is a real question about how those organizations, a lot of which, a lot of us were built, a lot of what we did was good at winning Democratic primaries, right? Like we were good at like winning or certainly better than we thought we might have been. we beat longstanding incumbents, and then we got, or we contested for open seats and people were shocked and surprised. And I think the kind of, amount of, it's been said elsewhere, but just the kind of momentum of, and the kind of element of insurgency and surprise is not what it was. I mean, I think that's safe to say. But two, there's the fun thing we're talking about here is not winning Democratic primaries. We're talking about beating Republicans, right? Like we're talking about beating Trumpism, right-wing Republicans. And it doesn't, which is not to say that progressives and the left have not done that, right? But we have been part of those projects. We've been kind of partners in those projects, to be sure. Like I and many other people were very, very active in trying to beat Donald Trump in Pennsylvania and in Philadelphia, and worked and also to beat Republicans in state Senate and House seats and, in Congress, whatever. We worked very hard on that. But, as an overall project that, that we feel we have a particular claim on and can do in a particular way. I mean, that was in some ways the claim of the Sanders project, not just that he had this thing that he wanted to do, but was a good candidate to beat Trump, right? Like that was the claim, or, that many of our people are good candidates to beat Republicans, to beat Trumpism, to beat the right. So I think that is I think if we were to look at ourselves, right, and to to at least be honest about, because the answer can't simply be, yet again, Bernie would have won, although of course that's true, right? But what can we contribute on the left? Like and it can't just simply be ritualistically like socialism or barbarism or, socialism beats fat, again, which has to be true. But it's like, but it's really like strategically, practically, what are we going to do? How are we going to use this infrastructure that we have? the insights that we have, the program that we're trying to build up, to build a program to win, and I think that's the question of how we build more power outside of the ways that we have built it. That's one question. And there are legislative answers to that, I think, and and political answers. And I think we're still determining those, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, and possibly some, I don't know. I'm thinking just in terms of like governing with a spine. Like I'm reminded of soft on crime reform DA Larry Krasner being one of the few who would stand up to Elon Musk when he's doing his, by my reading of Pennsylvania statute, illegal lottery, that says in the code, I looked it up, you cannot do a lottery unless it is specifically authorized in advance by the Pennsylvania legislature, and he's doing it. And Krasner's like, no, you can't do that. And I mean, this to me strikes out as stands out as almost the worst failure of the Biden administration, that they didn't get Trump on any of his 1 billion crimes, including trying to overthrow the government, like the worst crime that you could imagine, because you're trying to overturn the very idea of crime, to just like replace law entirely with a, authoritarian regime. And they just let him run the clock out. It was 2 years before the investigation really got started. And, I feel like people are hungry for someone who, with just a bit of spark in their step or something, some fire in their belly, who's not like, well, norms and the Department of Justice policy requires that I have to sit around for 5 months and 18 months. And I guess I'll hire a special prosecutor after the January 6th committee shamed me into doing all this, that's right. Like the Trump administration is going to be an orgy of corruption. Like I was just reporting on it for a article tomorrow. There is a plot afoot among the crypto shills in Congress to take on the order of $750 billion of U.S. public assets and use them to buy 1 million Bitcoins. I'm serious. There's a bill proposed by Senator Cynthia Lummis in the Senate to do this. And what they're going to do is they're going to revalue the gold reserves of the United States. We have like 8,300 metric tons of gold in U.S. possession that is currently valued by statute at $42.22 per ounce. And the market value of gold is like $2,600. So you just revalue that, you get some spending authority at the Treasury, and you get $677 billion of spending authority that you can use to buy Bitcoin. This is what the legislation says. It's just, they're literally going to steal Fort Knox and use it to cash out all of the crypto billionaires who couldn't otherwise sell their Bitcoins because there isn't a bag holder big enough to buy their worthless magic beans. And I'm just like waiting for someone to raise a stink about this. It's so infuriating. They're literally going to loot Fort Knox. They're taking our gold. And like, has anyone heard of this? No, it's not like, I mean, this is something that I think if you explained it to people, you took the time to sit them down and walk them, like it would take probably 10 or 15 minutes to even get through what it even means, but they'd be outraged, the top 0.1% of Bitcoin wallets hold 27% of all of the Bitcoins ever minted. That's 2 orders of magnitude more concentrated than US dollar wealth, which is very concentrated. Look at Elon Musk. And you just like, somebody get pissed off about this in public, And I feel like maybe, I don't know, somebody could do that. Somebody, maybe you, Nikil, you could get pissed off.
Yeah, I mean, what you're pointing to, I will work up the rage, but the
N+1 article
you're pointing to is the lack of, or certainly there's no lack, but they're just like the unwillingness, to point to clear enemies, of which they are in plain sight, right? I mean, they're just, the Trump is comparison with these folks. Like they're just like, they're everywhere and they are going to loot, the American public, right? And they're going to scam people and they're going to they're going to be rewarded for it. And that's like, And that's the game, and someone needs to point this out and fight them. And it's like, and I would say that it's like, and this is something that gets said more often on the left, but it's like, there are examples of people who adopt rhetoric of this kind, who are not necessarily representatives of it, who have been attorney general or whatever, who talk about going after student loan companies and pharma. I mean, frankly, our governor here did that in his first speech. Josh Shapiro did that when he in his inaugural speech, where you're like, who are the people who's at fault? Why is your life the way that it is? It's because of these people, and I'm going to go after them, and we should expose it. I mean, like, there's not, and so I just feel like there's a level at which this can become, should have been and should always have been the mode of attack. Going back to Krasner, I think it's not surprising that, Republicans in the state legislature have just totally chosen to go after him. I think in part, it's politics. They feel like it plays well in their areas to go after it's just a progressive prosecutor and what have you. But yeah, I think they also think of him. They're trying to, Krasner is popular in Philadelphia, actually. Like, he's not, and what he does is popular, and much of the anti-Trump energy in Philly anyway, in 2017 was channeled into his election, and he won overwhelmingly, despite, seemingly having a lot of things against him, in terms of, rising rates of homicide and violence and what have you, but that this is someone who recognizes the enemies, right, and goes after them. And you're right, that kind of spirited plain spokenness, is valuable, right? It's the right way to go.
It's clear who's on whose side, and you know what the stakes are, and you know the contrast, and then, okay, if we lose in that fight, at least we went down swinging. But when it's muddled, that's a different story. I know we're almost out of time here, but I do think it's important, if you have time for another question, Nikil, about, a lot of people are afraid of the Trump administration, especially on immigration, on abortion, things like this. And the left isn't usually big on like, yay, federalism, but state and local resistance to federal action is a thing. Have you been thinking about or talking to colleagues about, granted in PA, we've got the House, but like what can be done, or what the plans are to think about resisting the violence of the Trump administration on these things?
So yes, this has been, I think there's been, I've been engaged in, frankly, just today, there was a convening of state and local and federal elected officials in Philadelphia to kind of discuss and plan out, some responses here. I've been reaching out to federal partners. There's, and also just in touch with organizations and social movements. And, because in part, there are going to be major harms that come from this administration. And some of them are predictable and horrible. Some of them are, at the level of kind of grandiose promises. And frankly, it's depending on the promise. It's not clear how they may be able to deliver on some of it, to the part of it. Even if they deliver on part of it, it would be horrendous, in terms of if they may not deport all undocumented immigrants from the United States, but even a small proportion of mass deportation it's been done in this country before. It's going to cause untold harm to thousands and thousands of people. The things that we can, things that we can count on and are going to be horrendous are the pulling away of all supports for, our trans siblings, in terms of what, such that exist, right? To say nothing of like what is going to be, what else is, what kind of, in addition, surplus repression is going to be meted out. I think So we have to like prepare, and then just like on a granular level, like which I think people are, I don't know exactly prepared for, but just are aware can be coming, right? We knew this was possible, and we knew, but what is going to happen to housing and urban development, right? Like what is going to happen to like public housing? What's going to happen? These are all things that in Ben Carson I wrote the section for HUD in Project 2025, fundamentally amounts to like a shredding of the department in various ways, the replacement of civil servants by political appointees. Of course, the ending of all efforts at desegregation, et cetera. So all of which is to say there's a lot that they've promised. There's a lot that they can in fact do. And we'll see what, I think we'll know some things that they'll definitely do and something else that they may do. And stuff that we didn't see coming. At the local level, there are some things that we can just do. Like if they take away supports, or if they're like, nobody has to desegregate housing anymore, that is bad. That's a bad thing to do. But Philly and parts of Pennsylvania can say, well, just because you're not requiring us to do that, we're still going to do it, right? We're going to do it, seriously, openly, like proudly. We're fighting. I think there are things that we should do in that regard. How much can we do to offer healthcare and services to people who are gender nonconforming, non-binary, are trans folks? Like we can do more here, right? We ought to do more. And there are things like that I think we can do. But I think there is also a question of like what we can do at a state and local level proactively to, offer housing supports when housing first policies are, discarded at the federal level. I'm focusing on housing just because it's been something that we've been working on for a while, but I think there are things that we can approach a lot of different issues that way. But one thing we just absolutely cannot do is retreat from our commitments. And I think that there is, in the midst of some of the discussions about where, what vulnerable Democrats run on, and, to the extent, and to whatever extent the party is responsive to or needs to say no, to its left or what have you, like you are risking confusing, some kind of like coalitional issues, right? Like, how does someone run in a tough district? What have, like these kinds of like, what are, comparatively like narrow questions to what do we believe in, right? Like, who are we going to fight for? who are we going to protect? And I think that we need to protect everyone, right? We need to, and like, it's important to be loud and clear about it. And I think that because also that's how we build the movement capacity for it. It's not just going to be legal efforts. It's not just going to be, politicians, just figuring it out. Like we need mass movement power. Like and I think that we've had it before, and we have the infrastructure to mobilize that. Honestly, it's stronger than it was, right? It's stronger than it was. And, even if people are exhausted and stunned and, as I think people feel to some degree, and, and I think I think we have the ability to weather this and do more than in some ways than the kind of high points that we saw in 2017 and what have you. But
that's hopeful. And look, you have a fresh 6 new years, so you can let your lefty freak flag fly, right? Like you can just go nuts.
just four. I'm not, it's Pennsylvania Senate. We're not the U.S. Senate here.
All right. That's crazy.
We don't get to just luxuriate. Hey,
and look, the last 2 weeks felt like 10 years. So 4 years is an eternity. So
you talk to people who've lived in Russia, and like this was a central strategy of Putin consolidating his regime, was to just get people to give up and, retreat into, personal matters, take care of their families and stuff, and think, well, at least I'll be safe. But as you see in Ukraine, that's not necessarily the case. And I think by the same token, there's lots of stuff we can do in local communities and at the state level, depending on the state. But, just this evening, Trump announced he's going to put 25% tariffs on everything coming in from Mexico and Canada. Those are our two biggest trading partners. That's like $800 billion of commerce per year. Nobody voted for that. That's the flip side of the whole media lying strategy, is that
or if they did, they didn't realize that the tariffs are paid by the people.
Yeah.
So.
And so I think there's going to be real opportunities to sort of, as part of a mobilization effort, to be like, look, this guy is lying to you. That he is handed again a Goldilocks economy on a silver platter, and he's going to mess everything up. And it's his fault. And you can't believe this crap. So anyway, thanks for coming on the show, Nikil, Senator Saval. Much obliged. And thanks for listening, everybody. We will see you in the next episode.